On today's Locked On Giants podcast, Adoree Jackson is back in the fold. Some thoughts and why the Giants didn't make this move sooner. That's coming your way next here on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Trainer, credential member of the New York Giants media for Locked On Giants, as well as for New York Giants on SI.com, which is where you can find my written work. And as always, welcome on in to my Blue Crew community members, my everydayers, and everybody in between, including my newcomers. Thank you all for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And if you have not already done so, please consider subscribing to the YouTube channel. And don't forget to click the little bell so that you are notified every time I post a new video. And like the video, if you wouldn't mind, it all helps. And if you listen to us here on our podcast platforms, it's always appreciated if we can get a 5-star review. If you like the podcast, that is appreciated. So thank you again for tuning in. On today's Locked On Giants podcast, Adoree Jackson is back, and I'm going to give you a little bit of background information because a lot of you have said to me, why didn't the Giants do this sooner? What was the holdup? I'm going to kind of go through this scenario with you, and I'm also going to talk about the cap ramifications, because there are some cap ramifications involved with this whole thing. And then in segment 2, I'm going to give you the 2 keys, overall keys for the Giants and whether or not they have a successful 2024 season. All right, we'll talk a little bit about that. And then in the final segment of the program, with the cornerback position shored up, what are the remaining questions? Pretty simple, but we'll go through that anyway. And I'll also talk about some of the possible answers to those questions. So that's our show for today. Again, thank you for tuning in. Let's kick it off. Adoree Jackson is back. All right. So word broke early this morning, Friday morning, that Adoree Jackson was coming in for a physical, which he had, and obviously he passed. And, a few hours later, he was announced as having signed by the national media. The Giants didn't put the announcement out, but the deal is done. 1-year contract for Adoree Jackson to come back to shore up the New York Giants cornerback room, which was kind of thin on depth, which is something we've talked about probably a lot on this podcast. All right, so a lot of you said to me when this news came out that Adoree Jackson was visiting, you said, hey, Pat, how come the Giants didn't do this sooner? What's going on here? Folks, we alluded to it yesterday on the episode with Ed Valentine, and I'm here to tell you, last year, Adoree Jackson made business decisions towards the end of the year. Now, to be fair to Adoree Jackson, he was banged up. All right. In week 7, he had a neck injury. Week 8, he had a neck injury. Weeks 10 and 11, he had a concussion. And it's interesting because if I remember correctly, I don't think I saw Adoree Jackson's name show up much during the free agency period. I didn't see it linked to his name linked to other teams. I could be wrong, but if they were, he wasn't in high demand considering that he's still under 30. So I got to thinking was he so banged up last year? And plus with the way the season went, was he maybe thinking about retiring? That's what happened with Darren Waller. Darren Waller just got down with, the injuries and, how things were going, and he decided to walk away. So you almost wonder if maybe that was behind Adoree's, downward slide. Now, at the beginning of the year, they did move him to the slot. That's where he played most of his slot snaps for the Giants last season. I never got the impression he really liked playing down in the slot. And, they did it obviously because they wanted to get Trey Hawkins and Deonte Banks on the field. We all know how that worked out. Trey Hawkins struggled, and pretty soon, they were back to putting Adoree Jackson back at cornerback too. So just a really rough and emotional year, I think, for Adoree Jackson. And this is just me speculating here, which I know I shouldn't do, but, just trying to look at things through his eyes, I could see why maybe it dragged him down. Now, as a result of that, players always talk about, hey, I'm here to do whatever the coaches want. And they're kind of expected to follow marching orders and, do so with a smile on their face, even though it might not be putting them in the best position to succeed. So I think what happened, I think one of the reasons why the Giants didn't try to re-sign him is they kind of saw that drop off. And maybe, like I said, maybe Adoree was just, being dragged down by his circumstances. And the Giants at that point, I think, decided, okay, you know what? He's not really giving it his all like he could be. Let's just move on. All right. And I say that because the proof's kind of in the pudding. You look at free agency. They looked at Tre'Davious White. They looked at Darius Williams. They looked at Steven Nelson. Weren't able to get any of them. All right. But we never heard them looking at Adoree Jackson, even though the fact that they were looking at veteran cornerbacks, they never went back to look at a guy that they already knew. Then came the draft. They weren't able to get Lassiter. They weren't able to get McKinstry, and they had to pivot. All right. Again, even after the draft was done, you didn't hear any mention of Adoree Jackson. So knowing that the Giants needed a cornerback, and they knew they needed a cornerback, as evidenced by the fact that they tried to get one in free agency and the Hard Knocks episode that revealed that they wanted one in the draft, but yet they never reached out to Adoree Jackson. So fast forward, we get to the OTAs, and you have Jerome Henderson, the defensive backs coach, saying that, we believe in the young guys and it's Cordell Flott's job to lose. Okay, this after they went and tried to get an upgrade in free agency, and they admitted in the draft that they were looking to get an upgrade. So that being said, they were kind of hoping for the best. And what happened? Cordell Flott got hurt again, which is a big problem with him. He cannot seem to stay on the field. Nick McLeod entered the competition, but Nick is kind of a player that I think is better as a Swiss Army knife type of guy, a guy who you could put in special teams, outside corner if you need him to, slot cornerback, maybe even a little safety. I think he kind of, as weird as this sounds, I think he kind of loses value if you plug him in solely as an outside cornerback. So here you have this competition going on, and the Giants still aren't satisfied. And you can tell, even though they say, hey, we're good, we like our roster, etc. Well, what else were they going to say, right? Were they going to sit there and say, geez, we're not happy with our cornerback position, that it's paper thin? And the reason why they weren't going to say that is because had, they gone into the season with the status quo, and had there been an injury to, say, Deonte Banks, then what do? None of the guys they brought in over the summer worked out. They brought in guys on the practice squad. They just kept shuffling in cornerbacks. That should have been your first clue that there was a legitimate concern at cornerback. And when none of those guys worked out, it finally came down to, okay, you know what? Let's go back to Adoree. Let's see if, he's still interested in playing. Let's see if we can work something out and we can make this work for a year. Because next year you can mark it in ink, folks. Cornerback is going to be a top priority for this team next year. Put that in ink. All right. So Adoree Jackson comes back. He signs a 1-year deal. Now, I don't have the financial terms for that deal just yet as I record this. I'm thinking it might be a veteran minimum, but I don't know. And the fact that the Giants were so desperate for a cornerback. Now, if you remember, I told you on another episode, I said that when it came to signing vested veterans, Most teams usually wait till week 2 because at that point, the salary is not guaranteed, right? If a vested veteran is signed and is on the roster for week 1, that means his salary is locked in regardless of what happens. That's why you see a lot of teams wait till week 2 to add players. The Giants weren't waiting, all right? So they bring Adoree Jackson back. Now, if you remember, Adoree Jackson, the final year of his contract that he signed, I think it was in 2020, the 3-year deal, that year was voided, that final year, which would have been this year. That year was voided. There was dead money in that contract. It was about $2.8 million. Now, for those wondering, the answer is no. This new contract does not offset that dead money. It doesn't work that way. So yes, the Giants are still on the hook for $2.8 million in dead money for the voided year in Adoree's contract. And then, they have whatever expenses they allocated to him for this year. So that's a little background on Adoree Jackson. Now, as far as when we might see him, this is what's interesting. We don't know what kind of shape he is in. I'm assuming that he worked out and kept himself in decent shape, but he can't possibly be in football shape. Football shape, you got to get out there, you got to get hit, get tackled, you got to get, roughed up a little bit. So I would not be surprised if week 1 we see Nick McLeod start opposite of Deonte Banks, and then by week 2, Adoree Jackson takes over as the CB2. You want to get him ramped up because the last thing you want to do is put him out there and then God forbid he pulls a hamstring and he's of no use to you. So I do think the Giants are going to spend, the next week coming up, which is the week they're getting ready for the Vikings for the season opener. Use that time to get Adoree ramped up, then use the following week as they get ready for the Washington Commanders and just continue to get him ramped up and hope that he's ready to go by week 2. That's how I see it playing out. We'll see if I'm right, but I think that's what makes the most sense. All right, coming up next, Giant fans, we're going to take a look at the 2 areas, one on offense and one on defense, that are key to the New York Giants' success in 2024, so don't go anywhere. Hey, Giant fans, if you find that you need a mid-afternoon boost, why not give 5-Hour Energy a try? 5-Hour Energy fixes tired fast. Whether you have a long list to do for work or a list of do-it-yourself projects to tackle at home, take a 5-Hour Energy shot so that you can check off everything on your list. With 0 sugar and a convenient portable size, it's the perfect pick-me-up for getting stuff done. The 5-Hour Energy website offers several different flavors such as watermelon, tropical burst, grape berry, and so many more. You can build your own 12-pack or 24-pack to your personal taste and have it all sent right to your door. Visit 5hourenergy.com, and that's the number 5hourenergy.com, and get some 5-Hour Energy products and save 20% off your first order when you enter the promo code LOCKEDONFB, that's Frank and B like boy, at checkout. This offer is only valid until September 30th on one order and cannot be used with other promotions. The code is not good on subscription orders either. So again, check out that website. It's 5hourenergy.com, the number 5hourenergy.com, and that promo code for 20% off is locked on FB. Hey, Giant fans, thank you so much for making a Locked On Giants podcast your first listen today. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On Fantasy Football podcast. Get daily insight into the best fantasy draft strategies so that you can win your league this season. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with me. And on this segment, what are the 2 keys for the New York Giants to have success this season? I'm going to give you one each on offense and defense. And I'm going to start with the offensive side of the ball. And before I give you those keys, I just want to mention I've signed up for a new stat service. I'm really excited about this. It's called Remarkable. It's Inside Edge, and there's all kinds of cool stats that they generated um, based on search criteria. And I've actually pulled some of them for this segment, and I'm going to share them with you. And I hope to share these stats with you as we go through the upcoming season, because this is really some good stuff. It's based on leaderboards and stuff like that. Now, one of the drawbacks with stats, obviously, is that, this is week one, different team for the Giants, a different team for the Vikings, different teams across the board. But still, I'm going to give you some historical perspective when I talk about the areas that I think are important for the Giants. Offensively, the Giants have got to start fast. And I think, the passing game, that especially is going to be a key. All right. So when I say the Giants have to start fast, last season, the Giants had a point differential of minus 67 in the first quarter, second worst in the NFL. That means teams were outscoring them by 67 points in the first quarter. Well, now if you fall behind, guess what? You got to pass the ball. And that brings me to the next point here. Last year, when the Giants passed for more than 250 yards per season, they were 3-1, tied for the 8th best in the NFL. All right. The league average was 0.586 in that stat. So you want to incorporate the stat, but the passing game, but you also want to get off to a fast start to where you're not forced to have to pass and abandon the run. Why? Well, because the Giants' run game, as we know, no Saquon Barkley. And, I think it's going to be fine with Devin Singletary. We're still trying to figure out who RB2 is going to be. I think it's going to be the rookie Tyrone Tracy. But here's the other thing. First down was a problem for the Giants last year on offense. They were 5-1 when averaging more than 5 yards on first down plays last season, which was the 5th best in the NFL. All right. So it all boils down to the offense, fast start. If they can't get off to a fast start, then we got problems. If they get off to a start where they start turning over the ball, we got problems. If that offensive line, which has looked good, I'm optimistic that it's better and not just different this year. If they're not blocking for the quarterback, we got problems. There's enough, though, based on what we've seen in training camp and in the preseason, to think that things are going to be better. All right. You've also got Brian Dable, don't forget, calling the plays this year. I think it's going to be better. I'm optimistic about it. And I know some of you who are anti-Daniel Jones are like, yeah, but Daniel Jones is still the quarterback. So how can you sit there and say it's going to be better when he's still the quarterback? Folks, look, I have my doubts about Daniel Jones too. I've made no secret about it. But the Giants have done everything possible to build up around this guy. Better offensive line, a number one receiver, decent running game. They have Dable, who's a quarterback whisperer, going to call the plays. The guy who actually sat down with Jones when he was hired and said, okay, what do you like to run? If Daniel Jones can't make a go of this, given all this stuff, assuming all these guys stay healthy, which, knock on wood, hopefully they do. If he can't make it run, then guess what? He's out of here after this year. All right. So it's on him now to make all this work. Okay. Now let's talk about the defensive side of the ball. Even though the Giants added Adoree Jackson, you're still going to see some young guys back there. You'll probably see Tyler Nubin, at safety. You're probably going to see Dane Belton there. So the onus is still going to be on the pass rush. The Giants made a heavy investment in their pass rush, and they're going to expect these guys to force some errant throws. Now, interestingly, last year the Giants went 1-6 when they did not come up with an interception. That was tied for 4th worst in the NFL. Right? They are also winless, 0-5, with a turnover margin of -2 or worse. So getting turnovers is going to be key. You're going to need that pass rush. Now, they're not going to get home every single time as far as getting sacks. That's kind of unrealistic to expect. But if you can get them to move the quarterback off their spot, if you can get them to hurry the quarterback or hit the quarterback as he's getting ready to throw the ball, that can all help. Okay. The other thing the Giants defense needs to be better at, and again, this could be a benefit of the front seven, assuming that they come together. They have to limit third downs. Last year, the Giants were 0-4 when they allowed their opponents to convert more than 50% of their third down opportunities. All right, that's 0-4 since the 2022 season, when allowing their opponents to convert more than 50% of their third down conversions. All right. So you really need for that defense, especially that front seven, to step up, because again, you have Adoree Jackson back there. I think, like I said in the last segment, I believe by week 2, he will be the starter. I'd be surprised if he's in there in week 1, but you need that front seven to get after the quarterback. You need that front seven to stop the run and set the edge, which was a problem last year. We saw too many times where the Giants' run defense was being gashed on the edge. So these are all keys that the Giants need if they are to have a successful season. And from a grand scheme of things, can I mention this? Stay healthy. All right. We saw too many injuries last year. All right. This year, knock on wood, not too bad with injuries. Let's hope that stays true going into the season when the gloves are off and anything goes. All right, coming up next, some remaining questions. The Giants did tweak their roster a little bit since the 53-man cut down. We'll talk about some remaining questions right after this. Hey, Giant fans, passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts that you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay's Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. Again, thank you for spending part of your day with me here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And coming up next week, we have Labor Day on Monday, obviously, but I'm going to have a special pod for you. I'm going to have Tyler Dunn on the program, Tyler Dunn of Go Long. He just wrote a really detailed series on the New York Giants, sort of a behind-the-scenes type of look, in which he spoke with Daniel Jones, he spoke with Joe Shane and other people in the organization. So he's going to come on, talk about that. That'll be our Monday show. And then also on Monday, the Giants, they're back to work, but the media access, we're not going to be in the building Monday. We are going to do Zoom calls. I don't know if it's just going to be Brian Daboll and players or, just Daboll himself. But anything of note there, obviously, I'll have for you. And then weird schedule next week as far as practice goes. Giants practicing Tuesday, Wednesday. They are off Thursday, practice on Friday, off Saturday, and then kickoff, baby. Kickoff is going to be Sunday. And by the way, speaking of Thursday, Crossover Thursday returns next week. Our weekly crossover shows that we do with the hosts of the opposing team. So that's coming next week. All right, remaining questions. The Giants tweak their roster, their initial 53-man roster a little bit. As is expected, there's going to be churning at the bottom of the roster, but there are still some injury-related questions that I just don't know if the Giants have addressed. Now, we could say that we could probably cross off, cornerback as a question because that was a big one. But there's a couple that I'm still not sure about. For example, is offensive guard John Runyon going to be okay? John Runyon Jr. Was dealing with a shoulder issue. I think he did a little bit of work last week. Is he going to be good to go? I would expect he's going to probably be on the injury list. But we'll see. Maybe between now and the time they get back on the practice field, the first injury report's coming out Wednesday. Maybe he'll be fine and they'll take him off the injury report. But I'd like to know that, that shoulder is not an issue to where he's got to be on the injury report. This one's kind of a big one that's been flying under the radar. Who's going to be their return specialists? Now, they kept Gunnar Olszewski on the roster. Olszewski, though, last week in practice, or this past week, I should say in practice, still moving a little gingerly with that groin issue. So the Giants had a workout on Friday. They brought in a bunch of guys, I want to say about 15 guys, and there were quite a few return specialists amongst them. So I'm going to be curious to see if the Giants by Tuesday, if they make a move there and decide, okay, you know what, maybe we better add a guy just in case Olszewski is still a little on the gimpy side. So that's something we definitely want to keep an eye on. And then the final thing that I'm still not sure how shored up this is, do they have a swing tackle? Now, Evan Neal obviously made the roster. He can play right tackle. I believe he could play left tackle, although I don't think he's practiced at left tackle since he's gotten here to the Giants. And I'm just wondering if the coaching staff views him as a potential swing tackle candidate. All right. Or are they looking and saying, okay, you know what? If Jermaine Illuminor goes down for whatever reason, Evan, you play right. And if, God forbid, Andrew Thomas goes down on the left side, Joshua Zudu, you're up. And I got to be honest with you, I'm not crazy about that setup. I think, all things considered, that's what they're going to do. I think, again, you'll have Evan as the backup to right tackle, and Joshua Zudu, the backup to left tackle. I would like to personally see Evan Neal do both roles. I think Joshua Zudu is better as a guard, but I think that's how the Giants are going to roll. And the bottom line is, folks, let's just hope there are no injuries to Andrew Thomas and Jermaine Illuminor to where they've got to turn to a backup. All right, because that could get a little sticky. All right, that is going to do it for this edition of the Locked On Giants podcast. Thank you again for tuning in. Folks, have a great weekend, and we will be back with you on Monday. Ty Dunn is going to join me. Can't wait to see you. Have a good one.